My name is Willie Doherty. My exhibition, Where, is at the Ulster Museum in Belfast. The exhibition is organised in 4 spaces that correspond to broad themes and also in some ways work chronologically through the exhibition. And the first room deals with a number of works from the mid-1980s, black and white works with text. And in some ways this kind of frames the relationship between image and text that runs throughout the whole exhibition. And I suppose that is also apparent in the video works that are interspersed through the following 3 rooms, where again my relationship with text and the human voice is a recurrent theme or thread that runs through the whole exhibition. The second room really is dedicated to a body of large photographic works that were made in the mid-1990s, large cibachromes, and that comes right up to date with a number of works that were made within the last few years. The third room then really deals with another body of work at the border, both in Ireland, but also a number of works that were made in the US-Mexico border. So yeah, that play between image, text, and the broader thematic of our relationship to borders spans the entire exhibition. And the exhibition then ends with a new work, Where, Dove, which is a work that was made specifically for this exhibition, and the counterpart exhibition that has just finished in Modena in Italy. Where Dove, the new work that I've made for this show, has really developed out of thinking about the works that we had already selected for the show and the kind of pace of the show. And I think at that point I was ready to come back and maybe make another work at the border in Ireland. But also to take account somehow of how the experience of that border has changed, from the period in the mid-1980s through the 90s when I was making most of the photographic works. And I suppose the work in some ways seeks to reflect the experience of migration and how the border, as I suppose people of my generation think of the border specifically in relation to a kind of north-south dynamic, whereas there are people who now live in this country and who move through this country who experience the border in a different kind of way, the border that they, for other reasons, cannot cross or have difficulty crossing. So I wanted the work to somehow be open to that kind of more expansive understanding of what the border means at this moment. So in some ways that shaped the structure of the work. It's a diptych. So there are 2, I'll call them characters for want of a better word, but 2 figures who represent, I suppose, this kind of older understanding of the border and how the conflict here shaped that understanding of the border, and it's interesting that this is happening in the centenary of partition, but also how that experience of the border as a migrant is expressed through the presence of the other figure and his experience and the language he uses to talk about that experience of being both kind of trapped by the border in some way and feeling an equal but very different degree of uncertainty and trepidation to some extent around the border. Right from the very outset of this body of work, and I think the earliest work in the show is from maybe 1986. I've been interested in the landscape and how the landscape is really shapes our kind of understanding both of our relationship with the border, but more broadly speaking, how I sought to use the landscape in the 1980s to really find a means or a kind of language to talk about the conflict itself. A lot of what was unspoken in terms of identity around place and even to some extent religion was in some ways discreetly kind of expressed through relationships to landscape and consequently belonging. So it struck me that, you know, how we identify with landscape was very much connected to our identity as in terms of kind of religion or politics or a kind of mixture of both. And the language that was used to describe the landscape was often kind of couched in those kinds of terms. So it seemed to me that the landscape was a useful way of trying to kind of unpick some of that language that kind of embedded some of the division here. And I also noticed at the time that a lot of political kind of rhetoric often used kind of metaphors related to landscape to kind of try and, you know, describe a position or kind of eke out a position, you know. And an example of that is one of the works here, "We shall never forsake the blue skies of Ulster for the grey mists of an Irish Republic." I mean, which kind of says so much about those kind of attitudes of where you stand. And that photograph is actually taken on the banks of the Foyle in the north, looking south through this kind of grey, kind of foggy day. So that kind of mythical blue skies doesn't kind of appear to exist in either jurisdiction in that image. So yeah, landscape became for me something that was very kind of intrinsically connected with identity and place. And that has continued, you know, and in 2019, I made another work, a diptych, Between, which is a group of 20 photographs that were made on the border between Derry and Donegal. And so it struck me again that looking at the landscape was another way of talking about some of the inconsistencies and the absurdities that were kind of thrown up by Brexit. I have made some work in different places over the last a number of years. One of the work that I made for Documenta I actually made in Castle in 2012, and then a number of years ago I started thinking about making some work in the United States. Having had an opportunity to go there and make a work in Pittsburgh, I wanted to also kind of explore the US-Mexico border, which was really in some ways thinking about that in relation to all of the rhetoric that had come from Trump while he was president about the border. And also just to see, you know, what are the similarities, what are the differences? Is there an underlying sort of dynamic that would kind of make sense in thinking about that place in relation to this place? So for all of those reasons, I wanted to kind of go there. And so that work has been curtailed to some extent by the pandemic and the inability to travel over the last couple of years. But it's something I'd like to kind of return to when I can. So yeah, I have I guess a much more kind of open, more kind of exploratory attitude to kind of work in different places now and working, in different kind of more challenging contexts, you know, because I don't enjoy the idea of being somewhere and not really knowing what's happening, how things kind of work, how it kind of goes down, so to speak. But I understand that just takes more time. You just need to be able to make the investment in time to kind of go and then go back again and keep doing that so that you kind of build up a kind of an understanding or more knowledge of the place, and also just to give yourself time to process your own reactions. Having made some work in other border situations, including the US-Mexico border, I haven't really come to any conclusion that there is a very great difference between the experience of living along a border here or elsewhere. I mean, I think borders essentially are places that are created around uncertainty, about shifting sands, literally in some places where people find themselves on the edges of two very different experiences. And I think that general kind of sense of instability and of understanding that things will change is something that I found common in all places where a border becomes part of everyday life. Beyond that, I mean, but I think that's a very both a general observation, but it's also one that's very profound, because I think that sense of instability and uncertainty about what the future might be is kind of just part of what borders are. I'm very happy that this exhibition is taking place during the year of the centenary of partition. It gives the whole exhibition another context. Obviously, the exhibition has been delayed slightly because of the pandemic, but in some ways that kind of works to our advantage, in that it places it in a very squarely in a very different context. And I'm very comfortable and very happy with that. You know, that the broad thematic of the exhibition, looking at borders and our kind of evolving and changing relationship with borders, hopefully finds a place within that debate as well. So if this exhibition contributes to that dialogue about what partition means and what the next number of years might bring in terms of our understanding of not just this border but other borders, then yeah, that's a great plus for the exhibition, you know, and it's very good and very dynamic and exciting to be part of that dialogue.